Hello students, good afternoon. Last we are still in the same chapter, biological classification, which we have already completed few topics of this chapter. So today there's a chapter number 3, lecture number 3. We will discuss about the bacterial life processes. Okay, what are the different bacterial life processes, how the bacteria are surviving in living their own life, what metabolical processes are occurring in their life. So let's discuss about those things, the bacterial life processes. Okay, so the first life process in the bacteria we'll discuss, that is the bacterial respiration. Bacterial respiration. How the bacteria respire. How the bacteria respire in their life process. Now, bacteria who are there are the main two categories of respiration, which we call them. One is called aerobic respiration, and another is known as anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration. Fine. So aerobic respiration, it is the respiration type of the respiration where the organisms, they respire in presence of oxygen. In presence of oxygen. So these are the organisms who live in presence of the oxygen, their life. Without the oxygen, they cannot survive in their own life. Okay, so they are aerobic type of the organisms, which we call them. Broad categories. Anaerobic respiration, we simply call that those are the organisms, those are the bacteria who lives in absence of oxygen. In the absence of oxygen. So these are mainly the bacteria who live their own life without oxygens. Okay, they are known as anaerobic respirated bacteria. Okay, now in these two categories there are another two different categories. Every category, aerobic and anaerobic, they have two categories inside category of the bacteria, which we'll discuss like this. See, if there is the aerobic bacteria, if we talk about aerobic bacteria who lives the life in presence of oxygen. Okay, there are the two different types of the aerobic bacteria. One, there is two categories. One type of aerobic bacteria, they are known as obligate aerobes. Obligate aerobes. Okay, and another category, they are known as facultative aerobes. Facultative aerobes. Some bacteria. See, who are the obligate aerobes? Obligate aerobe bacteria are those bacteria who live their life, only in presence of oxygen. In presence of oxygen. Those are the organisms who can live only when the oxygen is available in their life process, then only they can survive. Okay, without the oxygen they cannot survive. Okay, so they are totally aerobic bacteria. For example, bacilli bacteria, bacillus bacteria. Okay, as well as there are the certain other type of the bacteria, aerobic bacteria, which we call them the chromatium bacteria. Chromatiums. Some of the examples of obligate aerobe bacteria. Similarly, there is a category called facultative aerobic bacteria. These bacteria, facultative aerobic bacteria, these bacteria, they are mainly anaerobic. They are mainly anaerobic, who respire anaerobically mainly. Their main respiration is anaerobic respiration, who lives in absence of the oxygen. But if these bacteria come in the condition, adverse conditions, where these bacteria they have to live in presence of the oxygen, so such bacteria can also survive in those conditions. They can also live in the condition where the oxygen is also available. Okay, so this ability of these bacteria to get survive in presence of the oxygen also, so that is called facultative. That means they are being facilitated this kind of the condition that they can survive in presence of oxygen also. So that is, they are called the facultative aerobes. So remember, basically their main respiration is anaerobic respiration, but these are the bacteria, but they can survive in aerobic conditions, also. So these bacteria can also survive in the aerobic conditions also. Okay, remember this. Say for example, like Clostridium tetani. Okay, or also Acetobacter aceti. So these are the organisms which can also survive in the presence of the oxygen, but basically they are the anaerobic bacteria. Okay, so that is called the facultative aerobic bacteria. In the same manner, like in the aerobic bacteria, these two category of bacteria are also present in the anaerobic respiration. They are also present in anaerobic respiration, like this. So if we talk about anaerobic bacteria, okay, so there are also two categories under the anaerobic conditions. Same one is called obligate. They are known as obligate anaerobes, and another is known as facultative anaerobes. So the bacteria, obligate anaerobic bacteria, are those bacteria who lives only in the absence of oxygen, who cannot survive in presence of the oxygen. They can live their life wholly in absence of the oxygen only. Okay, if they come in contact with the oxygen, they may not survive. So they are obligate aerobes. For example, Clostridium botulinum. Okay, complete anaerobe. They are completely anaerobic bacteria. Similarly, facultative anaerobes. These are those bacteria who are mainly respire aerobically. That means they are mainly aerobic respiration, which aerobically respires mainly, but they can survive under anaerobic conditions. They can survive under anaerobic conditions also. So it means the anaerobic condition is a facilitation for them. So they are going facilitated to get survive under the anaerobic condition. So that's why they are known as faculty to anaerobic bacteria. Okay. For example, Acetobacter is also Acetobacter. It is also the facultative anaerobe, as well as Pseudomonas. These are certain examples of different categories of the bacterial. The bacteria respires differently based on aerobic and anaerobic respiration. So these two categories you have to remember in both aerobic respiration as well as anaerobic respiration. So based on that, you will get the question in the Neet. Based on the examples, there would be given some example of this group, example of this group. Then you have to identify which example is resemblant to which group. Okay, based on that, you will get the question in the Neet examination. So this is about the bacterial respiration. Okay. Now let's talk about another process of bacterial life process, which is called bacterial nutrition. Bacterial nutrition. Okay. How the bacteria they obtain their food, by which ways they obtain their own food, how they store the food, everything, that how they obtain the nutrition, that is the bacterial nutrition process. See, based on the nutrition, the bacteria are broadly categorized into different categories. They are broadly categorized as, like, there are the bacteria called autotrophic bacteria. Okay, the bacteria who obtains their own food, who prepare their own food, they are known as autotrophic bacteria. Second category of the bacteria are, they are called chemosynthetic bacteria. Bacteria who obtains their nutrition by chemical means, they are known as chemosynthetic bacteria. And third are heterotrophic bacteria. These are the bacteria which do not prepare their own food. They are depending upon any other organism to obtain their own food. Okay, so there are three categories of bacteria based on the nutrition. That is why the bacterial nutrition, or the kingdom Monera mode of nutrition is vast, because in this kingdom the organisms, they have a mode of nutrition: photosynthetic also, autotrophic also, chemosynthetic also, heterotrophic also. All the types of the mode of nutrition they exhibit. Okay, remember this point. Now if we talk about autotrophic bacteria, see, I'll tell you one thing. In bacteria, how they obtain the food, how they obtain the foods. If we talk about autotrophic bacteria, or they are also known as photosynthetic bacteria, they are also known as photosynthetic bacteria. These are the bacteria who have the presence of, these bacteria have presence of pigments, special pigments, like the pigments are present in the plant cells to obtain their own food. Okay, similarly these bacteria also have the presence of pigments. With the help of those pigments, they are able to entrap the sunlight and to convert the sunlight into the chemical energy. So by that way they are able to obtain their own food. So they becomes the autotrophic bacteria. Remember this. So they have presence of these pigments, special type of pigments. Okay? Now there are different categories of autotrophic bacteria or photosynthetic bacteria also, based on these pigments, what type of the pigments they have. And also if you see in plant photosynthesis, if we talk about photosynthesis is the process in plants by which the plant is obtaining their food, synthesizing their own food. And in what way the plant is obtaining the food, synthesizing the food? The plant uses the carbon dioxide. And this carbon dioxide gets combined inside the plant, and there is a component which reduces the carbon dioxide inside the plant, that is the water. So that is why inside the plant this water availability is also important. The water helps to reduce the carbon dioxide, and that reduced carbon dioxide get converted into the glucose or organic compound. This is what is happening inside the plant. So in presence of the light, and in presence of pigments inside the plants, organs of the plants, when the light falls on the leaves, then there are the pigment, those pigment entraps the light, then with the help of that light, this water supplies electrons and it supplies the protons, both electron and proton. So electron source and proton source is being supplied to the carbon dioxide to get reduced. Then electron proton resource, the water becomes electron proton resource to reduce the carbon dioxide inside the plant and gets converted into glucose. It led the formation of glucose. Glucose molecule is prepared, and that is the food going to be synthesized, organic compound going to be synthesized inside the plant. With that, in plants also oxygen is released. The oxygen get released from the plants into the atmosphere, plus some amount of water molecules also are being released. This is the reaction. This is the chemical reaction of photosynthesis in plants, normal plants. Now if you see what is the difference between plant photosynthesis and what is the difference between bacterial photosynthesis. There is a difference in bacterial photosynthesis and plant photosynthesis. See here what is the difference. Now you have seen in the normal plant photosynthesis that water is going to be functioning as a reducing power agent which helps to reduce the carbon dioxide to convert it into the organic compound. Then oxygen is being released. In the photosynthesis process where the oxygen is being released, this process is also known as oxygenic photosynthesis. It is also known as oxygenic photosynthesis. Remember this point. Now what is happening in bacterial photosynthesis process? See, in the bacterial photosynthesis process, in the bacterial autotrophic photosynthesis, how they do the photosynthesis. So the bacterial photosynthesis, if we talk about bacterial photosynthesis, okay, so in the bacteria, same, they also uses the carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide, they are also using this to get reduced. But this carbon dioxide is not here combined with the water. Like the water was the reducing power agent in the plants. But in bacteria, they do not use the water as electron proton source. Here, instead of the water, they use some inorganic substance like, for example, either sulfur or either hydrogen sulfide. So they can use any inorganic compound instead of the water. Then what happens when the carbon dioxide is reduced with the inorganic substance? Electron and proton source is supplied by inorganic compound. Then in presence of the sunlight and in presence of the pigments like in the plants, same, the glucose is going to be formed as an organic compound inside the bacteria, as energy, as a food, plus there was a releasing of oxygen in the plant photosynthesis, because this oxygen, it comes from the water. This oxygen get released from the water. When the water was used here as electron proton resource, then only the possibility is that oxygen is going to be released. And this has been already proved as well by different contribution of different scientists. Same here, when the carbon dioxide gets combined with the inorganic compound here, so instead of that, inorganic compound is released, either sulfur or sulfur hydride, but not the oxygen. And also no water is being released like in case of plant photosynthesis. So in this photosynthesis, where the electron and proton resource have been utilized as an inorganic compound instead of the water, this is known as anoxygenic. It is known as anoxygenic photosynthesis. So this is the difference between the plant photosynthesis and bacterial photosynthesis. Remember this point. So the chemical reaction, if we show in the plants, it should be shown like this, and the chemical reaction in the bacteria, it should be like this. So with that, you are going to understand the difference between plant photosynthesis and the difference between the bacterial photosynthesis. So remember this point, there is a difference in electron proton resource utilizing in plants and in bacteria. Apart from these, the pigments, they are also different in bacteria as well as different in the plants. Okay, so based on these two things, autotrophic bacteria have been classified as like this. Okay, so now if we talk about first autotrophic bacteria. Only. Now these autotrophic bacteria have been further subdivided into the different groups like photo, auto, lithotrophs. Autolithotrophs. So autotrophic bacteria have been divided into two categories. One is called autolithotrophs, and another category is known as photoorganoautotrophs. Organoautotrophs. Okay, so one is the lithoautotroph, another is the organoautotroph. Okay, now photolithoautotrophs, what are those autotrophic bacteria? These are the type of autotrophic bacteria which uses an inorganic compound as electron and proton resource. So these are the bacteria, autotrophic bacteria, which uses electron and proton source as an inorganic compound, any inorganic compound. and photoorganotrophic. These are the bacteria which uses an organic compound as electron and proton resources. So those are the bacteria which uses any organic compound as an electron and proton resource. Instead of this use the inorganic compound, this use the organic compound. Based on that, they have been categorized photolithoautotrophs and they have been categorized as photoorganoautotrophs. Okay. Now, if we see under these two bacteria, these two groups of bacteria, photoautolithotrophs, they have been further subdivided based on the pigments and electron proton resources. They have been further subdivided as like purple sulfur bacteria. One type of bacteria is purple sulfur bacteria. And another category is there, green sulfur bacteria. Purple sulfur bacteria and green sulfur bacteria. What is the difference between these two? Remember, there are two differences. One, purple sulfur bacteria, they have a pigment. They contains the pigment called bacteriochlorophyll. Bacteriochlorophylls, or it's also called bacteriopyrin. Okay? Bacteriochlorophyll, they have a bacteriochlorophyll pigment, and these have a pigment called bacterioviridin. Bacterioviridin. So there is a difference in the pigment. They have a bacteriochlorophyll or bacteriopyrin, and they have a bacterioviridin. That's a difference in the two pigments. Second difference is these two bacteria, purple and non-sulfur bacteria. This bacteria, purple sulfur bacteria, they uses inorganic sulfur. They uses an inorganic sulfur as electron and proton resource. So these bacteria, like I have shown in the reaction, these bacteria uses the inorganic sulfur as electron and proton resource. Similarly, the green sulfur bacteria, they uses thiosulfate or hydrogen sulfide as electron and proton resources. Electron and proton. So that is the 2 points you have to remember to differentiate between the purple sulfur bacteria and green sulfur bacteria. Okay, remember there is a difference between the pigment, there is a difference between the electron proton resources they use. Okay, remember this thing. Now similarly, I'll give the example. There is the example of purple sulfur bacteria and green sulfur bacteria. Fine. So let me give you the example. Purple sulfur bacteria. For example, purple sulfur bacteria like thiozidans, okay, or they are also known as thiobacillus. These are some of the examples of purple sulfur bacteria. Okay. Similarly, green sulfur bacteria. Green sulfur bacteria are the examples like chromatium and chlorobium. Chromatium, chlorobiums. These are the examples of this category of bacteria. Okay, so remember these examples with the concept clarity of purple sulfur and green sulfur bacteria. What are they? What is the difference in their pigment? What is the difference in their electron proton resources? Okay, hope you understand this. Now in the same manner, like we have completed photo, auto, litho, autotrophs. In the same manner, if we talk about photoorganoautotrophs, these are the also the bacterias see, so these are the bacterias photoorganoautotrophs. These bacteria also have the two categories of bacteria. One, they are also known as purple non-sulfur bacteria. Now remember, in the first one classification, lithoautotrophs, there was the purple sulfur bacteria. Now here in photoorganotrophs, there is the purple non-sulfur bacteria, and another is green non-sulfur bacteria. So remember, in both the category you have to write down non-sulfur. Okay, there was a sulfur in first one, here it is the non-sulfur containing bacteria. So what is the difference in their pigments also? There is a difference in pigments mainly. So they have pigment called bacteriochlorophyll. So they have a pigment which is called bacteriochlorophyll, and they have the pigment which is called bacterioviridin. So that is a difference in the pigments. Same. Now if we see electron and proton resources, what they use, these bacteria, both the category of bacteria, purple non-sulfur and green non-sulfur bacteria, they both uses the same type of electron proton resource. They have a same resource, which is they contains the electron and proton resource. They contain any organic aliphatic non-sulfur containing compound. So these organisms, they can use any type of the organic compound, aliphatic organic compound, but which should be non-sulfur containing, not sulfur containing. That is the difference you have to memorize. That is the difference between the groups, different groups of the classification of the bacteria based on the nutrition, autolithotrophs and photoorganoautotrophs. Organoautotrophs, you have to remember, there are two types, purple non-sulfur and green non-sulfur bacteria, and their electron proton resource is the same, any aliphatic organic compound but non-sulfur containing, they can use it for their resources. Okay, remember this. Some examples like in the purple non-sulfur bacterias, examples like rhodospirillum, okay, or rhodopseudomonas, These are the examples of this group, purple non-sulfur bacteria. Some of the examples of the green non-sulfur bacteria, their examples like chloronema and chloroflexus. Chloronema and chloroflexus. Okay? So these are the two examples of the bacteria which comes the category of green non-sulfur bacteria. Okay? So this is the bacterial nutrition classification of bacteria based on their nutrition, how they obtain their food in presence of the different pigments and in presence of the different electron and proton resources. I hope you might have understood very well the concept of the bacterial life process of respiration as well as the nutrition. Okay, so I would like to conclude the topic today here. Let's see you in the next topic. We'll forward this topic in the next lecture. Thank you so much.